In this video, I'm going to go over some real-time mesh cleanup. So first, just reducing the mesh where I can, where it doesn't really affect it. You can see that this is only 3,000 triangles right now. So this is already a very efficient mesh, and it doesn't really need to be reduced in order to run well in real time. But if it can be reduced without actually changing the form, you might as well do that. So I'm going to take a look at that. And I'm also going to look at ways that deformations may potentially be improved by subtle topology alterations. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the reduction phase, and let me just go ahead and turn off the joints for now and just hide that skeleton layer so I don't accidentally select it. Just start somewhere up top here and take a look for places on the mesh that aren't really altering the form very much. At the front here, this one is altering this form slightly. So for instance, if I were to drop out that edge loop, this would suck in a little bit. Whether that's enough to be concerned with, that amount of change right here, is something that I would much rather just leave up to the artist. So in this case, I'll just leave that alone. I'm just going to try to drop out the loops that really make no difference whatsoever. So this one's a good example. I'm just going to shift right click, delete edge, no change whatsoever in the look of the geometry. These spans were most likely put here when this thing was being smooth mesh previewed, and it's not going to be smooth mesh previewed in real time, so we're going to have this thing as low and as efficient as possible. So I'll drop those guys. Again, you should basically see zero difference in the edge loop flow and the silhouette of this guy. So this one right here may potentially be useful as the clavicle moves up here. There's compression that happens here, so having a little bit of extra geometry through here is probably a good idea. Now around the shoulder, there's some stuff that I want to do in here in terms of deformation. I'd like to add another span across here again so that this collapsing that happens through here might be able to do that a little bit smoother. So maybe just a subtle change I'll come back and do in here. For now, I'll just go through here and take care of the reduction. This edge loop, for instance, could probably go basically no change whatsoever. Through here, these spans that are sort of doubled up and really close to each other like this, they should probably be one of them should probably be removed as well. So let me go ahead and do that. No change to the form. This one, you see the inside has this notch here, and at the back, so probably this back one could go. It's going to make a very subtle change right here, but it's probably not big enough to ever be even noticed. Same thing up here. You want to keep this one span so you can make the forearm whatever size and shape you're looking for, just the same as this. Like, this is really good so that you can make sure the bicep is the right shape and everything. But that extra span on the forearm was really not doing anything. That span, not really doing anything. So the fingers here, I'll have to do something, just little tweaks. This is actually not bad in terms of where the geometry is placed for the deformation itself. But one of these spans back here is probably unnecessary, so I'll go ahead and drop that out. Same on this finger. And I'm just going to do half of this mesh and then just mirror it back over. So through here, again, there's going to be a little bit of a tweak when we get around to the deformation side of things. But for now, I'll just leave that alone. That span there doesn't really look like that's altering the shape. I'll just delete it. Basically, see no change. Get rid of it. Same thing in here. All these edge loops are basically not changing the form, so pull out just to make sure it doesn't change. Basically no change. Now this here is functioning as the knee area itself. So I want to leave this alone. I need this extra span that's in here, and may actually need to add a span in here to make that deform really well. Okay, now through here it looks like, for instance, I could grab this edge ring, just select one edge and press the up arrow, and then just collapse those. And the difference between collapsing and merging, and you see that does change this subtly, but you just go ahead and collapse it again. The difference between collapsing and just deleting an edge loop is collapse sort of averages the two edge loops that are on the other sides of the rings, whereas delete just completely removes one and takes away whatever form that was doing. So in this case, sometimes it's better to do a collapse if you are looking for an average, but a lot of times you can just straight delete them and it'll look fine. That looks good. Um, Again, down here, that one probably unnecessary. That one's probably not doing anything to the form either. Something like that. Most of the rest of these look like they have a good solid purpose. I suspect that one of these spans would be adequate to maintain that form. So let's just take a look at what that does. So let's just zoom out here. I can't necessarily tell the difference between that foot and this foot, and we just remove some of those spans. Same thing goes up here, just sort of dropped out some of the spans to um, see how much they were having an effect. This guy here is definitely having an effect. I'm not sure how much of an effect this fella is having, so let me just try dropping that out. So again, that's a very subtle change, and from a small distance like this, I'm not sure that even at this point I can tell the difference. And this might and most likely is larger than this character will be on screen. I suspect this character is going to be more something like this. So the difference between those two is basically non-existent at that distance. So that's a good look at just dropping out spans that aren't necessarily changing the profile of your form. So either collapse or delete those out. Now let's take a look at how this thing is going to deform. So around the shoulder, again, it might make sense to go ahead and add another edge loop that continues up. So basically just take this loop and sort of swing it around the shoulder up here so we have a little bit more area that we can flex around here. So I'll go ahead and do that with the interactive split tool is probably easiest. And my tool options, by the way, for interactive split are I just have one magnet turned on, which basically is going to snap to the middle if it snaps. Then I have a low tolerance turned on. So that will still allow me to snap directly to an edge point, even though it just didn't. Snap directly to an edge point and then also just sort of put it wherever I want as I move it around the rest of the mesh. So you can see I'm be creating a little bit of quirky geometry through here. It's just going to require just a little bit of cleanup, but it won't be too bad at all. And that guy should just tuck right in here. Okay, and enter to complete that loop. So now you can see I just have created this sort of weird area here, and I'll just go ahead and collapse that. And then this guy is going to need to be moved up and out so that it follows the same structure as the arm does. So that looks pretty good. Same thing happening up here. And I can start just using the G key as I select these, so just pressing G to repeat that action so I don't have to keep going through that marking menu. So that looks pretty good. So now you can see the problem spots are here, the way this comes across, and the way it comes across over here. Otherwise, these are quads. All my loops are looking good. I have pretty good edge loop flow throughout this thing. So really, looking at this, this is an extra span. I think probably it won't make any difference if we get rid of one. So I'll just press up arrow, select that edge ring, and then just go ahead and collapse those. And in this case, it actually kind of looks like this top one is the one that matters. So I'm just going to sort of take that back and this time just delete it. So now I'm just going to go ahead and delete that edge. So now the form stays basically the same. Everything looks the way it was originally modeled, but we've just reduced another span and potentially improved the way this thing's going to deform. So that looks good. Now have a reasonable amount of geometry here to deal with. And you got to think about this as you are looking at your mesh. Like the arm and clavicle, so the shoulder and clav have already moved up. So if this shoulder is going to come down, what's going to happen is these spans are going to compress together through here, and these are going to expand out. So these are in a not a fully compressed, but in a more compressed state right now, and these are in a more expanded state. So just need to keep that in mind so you can think, well, if this thing needs to compress significantly more, maybe these should be spread out just a little bit down here, and maybe these should be tightened up. But as it is, these are looking fine. I wouldn't change those. These down here maybe could use just a slight tweak. So I'll do the same thing here with slide edge that I was doing before, and just sort of push this out and up just a little bit. And then I'll maybe do the same thing just to give this guy a little bit more breathing room right there. So something like that looks pretty good. I also notice that now I have potentially a sharper angle here than is necessary given the fact that I have a new span available. So I can just soften these things out if that's the intent. Honestly, I'm not quite sure if this is supposed to be a hardened edge or not, but I'll just sort of bring it down to make it roll in just a little bit better since I'm not sure. So something like that looks pretty good. And I'll go ahead and do a soften harden on this. And I need to double check my soften harden angle since I didn't. So it's set to anything less than 45 degrees is going to be a soft edge, and anything over 45 is going to be hard. On a low poly character, oftentimes you might need to push a little harder than that. So if the intent was for all these things to be softened out, that works better at 60 there. Okay, and I was going to say this looks like this could potentially come out, but I actually think this is helping the form pull up here. That looks pretty good. Okay, so I'm going to leave the shoulder like that. That's looking pretty good. Now in terms of the elbow, I just did another video that you can take a look at in terms of how to set up your topology to really deform well. And I just did it with a cylinder on that one, but I'm just going to go ahead and alter this one to match that, that method just a little bit. So the idea would be we'll try to have this angle come in from the back of the elbow, and then this span will sort of radiate this way. So this side will actually push this way a little bit and then come in here, and then there'll be one more span here that will hold strong with the forearm part of the arm. So this part's going to not be influenced very much at all by the movement of the elbow, and this one won't either back here. We want this to stay way out here so that it maintains more or less a right angle here. So go ahead and pull these in, and this will start altering the form. So I'll do this from the top view here just so I can see what I'm doing. And what I might do even before I do this is just go ahead and add another span here so I don't change this layout too much. So I'm going to go ahead and edit mesh, cut faces, want to make sure that I have interactive turned on here, and then I'm just going to click here and then drag so the angle is angled out something like this. And basically what I'm doing is I'm going to create these sort of radiating areas like this so that this elbow will deform just a little better. Okay, so this guy now, I guess I'll just go ahead and alter it. I was going to take it out and put it back in, but it might be easier just to go ahead and alter this. So this guy here is going to need to start sliding into place. Something like that. And eventually that one's probably going to go anyways. Pull this forward a bit. So that is ending up softening that elbow just a little bit. So I'm going to accommodate that just by bringing this forward and probably tucking it in just a hair. Hopefully that'll still retain the shape that was intended there. So that looks actually okay. I think that some of these edges, if we look at this from the top for instance, could probably just be repositioned a bit just to make it a little bit smoother line coming in. So I'll just do that, just sort of smooth that out so the edge loop is a little cleaner looking. I want to make sure what I'm doing in terms of changing the volume of this, but it looks like most things were pretty straight along the x-axis there. So that's looking fine still. Okay, that 60 wasn't quite strong enough, so I'd have to come back through and just manually clean that guy up. But that's looking pretty good. and I'm not sure how much this is actually adding right now. Let me try. It was adding a bit, so I'm just going to loosen that guy up by just adding another span across here. And again, this is if you're going to use the cut tool, it's a good idea probably to do that in orthographic view. Otherwise, your cut may accidentally go across a face that you didn't intend. So let me just go across here, and I'll just try to match that angle a little bit, something like that. So now I should be able to drop this guy out without the form changing very much. Okay, so that's looking pretty good there. The wrist, I'm not entirely sure on this guy. It looks like it's got this big cuff here. So there's a good chance that this is going to be able to deform pretty well just on this side, and the cuff itself might stay relatively rigid. This, I believe, did have an extra span on it before I started doing this, so that span may be useful if this cuff is supposed to deform. I'm not entirely sure how this is supposed to look. So I'm going to leave it like this, but if this is supposed to bend across the wrist, that you should just add a loop back in there. So the fingers, looking pretty good for these joints out here. You can see it's got that out angle, just like I just did for the elbow. That's a good idea for helping maintain the volume. So the outside is just sort of a wider distance, more radiated, and inside here things are a little closer together. So I'm going to go ahead and grab that one, and I'm going to start doing slide edge in a few places here. So I'll just try to rebalance these a little bit where they're all coming to center just a bit more, something like that. Okay, so that'll probably bend pretty well. So this one right here will just stay with this part of the finger. This one will largely stay with this, but will deform to sort of accommodate. And one thing that I forgot to do over here on the elbow, and I'll also do maybe on the finger there, is just bridge this out so that when this bends, it doesn't have this extra span in the middle that collapses. So that just tends to cause a little bit of ugliness. So I'll just do this with the interactive split tool, and I would just go from there to there to there. And this is going to start creating what initially looks like really weird geometry, but it actually does deform better. So it's worth taking a look at this this topology setup. So this part here would end up going away, and what that does is now as the elbow bends, it just collapses this one edge, so it doesn't end up with a V notch, which happens a lot of times on low poly stuff. And then at the back of the elbow, I can just add a little bit more geometry just so the elbow doesn't look quite as sharp when it bends. So again, I'll just do that with the interactive split, start at an edge, and then just bring that out. And this is something that I could change after I do a binding just and see exactly where this goes. I could tweak this around a little bit just to make it work a little bit better with deformations. But having this edge here is going to be a good idea for making this thing a little bit cleaner in deformation. Okay, so I'll just soften harden again. Some of those edges should clean up. That looks pretty good. So even though that topology looks really weird as far as edge loop flow, this will actually deform pretty well. And again, I have another video that demonstrates this. You certainly don't have to do this. I just think it deforms well personally. So you could do the exact same thing here. So this guy here would just come across. I'll just do it again. I'm not going to do it on the back finger since it's just sort of repeating the same action here. But it would basically be the same thing there and then over here, and then this edge loop here ends up going away. Oh, whoops, I ended up doing that one backwards. So it goes this way when you're not an idiot. So like that, and then double click that guy, and that guy is going to come out. And then you may or may not want to add a span up here to soften the way that finger bends. If you do, it's simple enough. The same thing as the elbow. So that looks pretty good there. The hips looking fine. The knee, probably fine. It's a little. This is a little bit quirky in terms of the way a knee looks, since it's just relatively square. It's a skinnier part. I can't tell like if it's supposed to bend across this right here. Um, this may be enough geometry to sort of hold that up and make it look good. So since I don't exactly know, I'm just going to leave that alone. And that looks pretty good. So I'll just mirror this thing. So I'm going to shift double click on one of the edges that is on the side that I don't want, and then just delete it. And then I can just double click to select the rest of that shell. And that'll just delete that whole side there. And then what I want to make sure is double click on the border edge and then check this from the front view, for instance. And you just want to make sure that you don't have any verts that are sticking out. This looks really clean. You can always just turn on the grid. You can always just turn on the grid here and snap to the grid. So I'll just make sure that I'm on world mode, make sure retain component spacing is off, hold X for snap to grid, and then just snap to center. And now you're guaranteed that all those verts are exactly in a perfect straight line. And that just is going to make your mirror work better. So then just mesh, mirror geometry. We need to mirror on negative X right there, merge with the original, and merge vertices or connect border edges. Either one is fine, but you have to be aware with either one that you should go back and double check that you're not accidentally merging more stuff than you intend. I don't know why it is, but with the mirror operation, you can't change this merge threshold in the tool options. It makes no sense to me, but 0.1 is a pretty high value for me. Like I prefer to run this around 1,000th. That way only things that are directly on top of each other will merge. So in this case, everything still merges, everything looks good, but I'm not accidentally merging verts that happen to be close together somewhere else. So that's looking pretty good. Again, I'll just do a soften harden on that whole thing. That should fix that center line, which now looks good. And so instead of being 3,000 tries, I'm at about 2,400 tries. So maybe 600 triangles or so dropped out. And basically there should be no real difference in terms of what this looks like in profile. And hopefully it will actually deform a little bit cleaner now, given this topology. And for the knee, you could do something similar to the elbow if you feel it's necessary. But again, I don't really know how that's supposed to bend, so I'm just going to leave it like that and call that guy good. Well, I forgot to mention actually, before this thing's really done, I would want to make sure to kill the history. So look at all this history that's stacked up on this thing. You want to get rid of that before you do your bind. So just do edit, delete by type, or delete all by type. In this case, I only have this one thing. So delete all by type history. That'll clean this up. So now I don't have any incoming history. I can turn my skeleton back on, and now I'm ready to actually bind and move ahead.